In our video today, a war crime so horrifying, so disgusting, so vile, that even the Nazis were like, whoa, this is some crazy shit. But first, this video is sponsored by HelloFresh. Seamless transition right there, folks. Welcome to 2021, where you want to eat a little healthier, you want to try new things, maybe you want to even be more fiscally or environmentally conscious. HelloFresh is your gateway to all of those things. We're talking about a specially designed meal kit that's going to help you break out of that recipe rut that you've been in for weeks now. Right? Who has time to go across town to the grocery store, get misted on through the produce aisle, and hope no one gets too close in the checkout lines? Right now, the grocery store is more of a hassle than it's ever been. Enter HelloFresh, and it's delicious. 5-star choices. They work with local farmers to send you delicious, locally sourced meals that help you skip the meal prep and put dinner on the table in 30 minutes or less. It's awesome. HelloFresh is a perfect service because of its flexibility, but also because of its responsible business model. If you like variety, you're also not locked into options. You can change your meal preferences for a week. If you just want to switch things up, you're getting bored, get something else in there. And of course, virtually everything with HelloFresh is recyclable, sustainable, and sanitized. Because COVID. HelloFresh is a fun experience. If you've never tried a meal kit, you are missing out, and HelloFresh are the best on the market. Right now, you guys can go to HelloFresh.com and use my code BRAINFOOD10 for 10 free meals, including free shipping. Of all military units in the Second World War, few were as infamous or as feared as the German Waffen-SS. Entirely separate from the regular German army or Wehrmacht, the SS, short for Schutzstaffel or Protection Force, were the paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party. Its members swore allegiance not to Germany or the German government, but directly to Adolf Hitler himself. First formed in 1925 as a personal bodyguard for Hitler, by 1939 the SS had grown into a powerful organization, 250,000 strong, divided into 3 branches. The Allgemein, or General SS, which ran the whole organization, as well as the Gestapo secret police, the Totenkopfbande, which ran the concentration camps, and then the Waffen-SS, the combat wing which fought alongside the regular armed forces. As the vanguards of the Nazi Party, the men of the SS were selected for their racial purity, physical prowess, and absolute devotion to Nazi ideology. As Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, explained, one basic principle must be the absolute rule for the SS man. We must be decent, loyal, and comradely to members of our own blood, and to nobody else. What happens to a Russian or to a Czech doesn't interest me in the slightest. Recruits' family trees were rigorously scrutinized for even a single drop of Jewish blood, and in the early days, even a single tooth filling could disqualify a candidate from serving. Though as the war ground on and the SS grew increasingly desperate for men, its standards would relax substantially, with even Muslim volunteers from the Balkans being allowed into its ranks. As soldiers, Waffen-SS troops underwent a brutal training regime to forge them into perfect warriors, tenacious, cunning, contemptuous of danger, and courageous to a fault. While this tenacity and zeal made the Waffen-SS a formidable fighting force, it often proved counterproductive, for instance, with their refusal to retreat in the face of battle, resulting in disproportionately high casualty rates. Their fanaticism also made them merciless towards their enemies, with Waffen-SS units committing countless atrocities against enemy prisoners and civilians over the course of the war, especially in Poland and the Soviet Union. One atrocity, committed in France in the summer of 1944, was so heinous that it shocked the SS and the Wehrmacht High Command to their core and prompted the Nazis to investigate their own men for war crimes. The town of Oradour-sur-Glane lies in the Haute-Vienne department of southern France, around 10 kilometers northwest of the famous pottery center of Limoges. A sleepy market village of less than 1,000 people, for most of the war, the town was all but untouched, with life carrying on much as it had for hundreds of years. But all of that would change on the 10th of June, 1944. 4 days earlier, on the 6th of June, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy as part of Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Prior to the invasion, a massive Allied deception campaign called Operation Bodyguard had convinced the Germans that the actual landings would take place in the Pas-de-Calais, leading German commanders to station their units far away from the Normandy coast. Among these units was the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, which had recently been transferred from the Eastern Front to the Southern Front French town of Valence-d'Argent for refitting. Soon after the overlord landings began, the division commander, SS Standenführer Sylvester Stadler, received orders to ready his troops for battle and prepare to make the 600-kilometer journey to Normandy to repel the invaders. On the 8th of June, the division headed north, a journey seriously hampered by the French resistance, who sabotaged rail lines and flat cars and felled trees across the roads. Then, on the morning of June the 10th, SS Sturmbannführer Adolf Deichmann, commander of the 4th SS Panzergrenadier Regiment de Führer, was approached by officers of the Milice, the paramilitary wing of the French collaborationist Vichy regime. The officers told Deichmann that the night before, SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kampf, commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion, had been captured by the Marquis de Limaçon, a local French resistance group, and was being held in a nearby village. Enraged, Deichmann quickly assembled his men and set off to exact his revenge on the villagers. Brutal reprisals against civilians for sheltering and assisting partisans was official policy with the Nazis in its occupied territories. Exactly 2 years prior, following the assassination of SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich by Czech agents trained and equipped by the British, the nearby village of Lidice was liquidated by the SS, with 340 of its residents being either shot in place or sent to extermination camps, and the town itself was razed and erased from all maps. Oradour-sur-Glane was not even the only reprisal committed by the Das Reich division that month. On June the 8th, resistance fighters captured the town of Toul, only for it to be retaken the next day by the 2nd SS Reconnaissance Battalion, who proceeded to hang 99 villagers. On the 10th of June, SS soldiers were fired upon from the church tower while passing through the town of Marcelin, leading to 27 villagers being executed. But the massacre in Oradour-sur-Glane that was about to unfold was by far the largest, most methodical and most brutal ever to be committed on French soil in the entirety of the Second World War. Nobody knows exactly why Adolf Deichmann chose Oradour-sur-Glane for liquidation, as it had never been a major center of resistance activity. The best explanation historians have been able to come up with is that Deichmann mistook it for the nearby village of Oradour-sur-Vez, error that was to have horrific consequences. Whatever Deichmann's reasoning, by 2 p.m. the Der Führer battalion arrived in Oradour-sur-Glane and began setting up roadblocks on all roads leading into and out of the village, sealing its residents, and 6 outsiders who happened to be bicycling through inside. The villagers, many of whom were in the middle of their midday meal, were confused by the sudden invasion, but as the Germans had hardly bothered them before, few panicked or attempted to flee. Once the village was sealed off, Deichmann made his way to the town hall and informed the mayor, Jean de Certeau, that he was conducting a check of identity cards and that the villagers were to assemble in the main square. At de Certeau's instructions, the town crier, Jean de Pierrefiche, set off around town with an SS trooper, beating his drum and calling for the villagers to follow Deichmann's orders. Nobody was exempted. The head teacher at the girls' school, André Benet, was dragged from her sickbed with a high fever and forced into the main square in a nightgown. Another man, Clément Broussardier, was dragged from the barber's chair in the middle of a haircut. When he tried to collect his bicycle, he was ominously informed, "You won't be needing it anymore." Despite Deichmann's claims, none of the villagers' identity cards were ever examined. Instead, once everyone was assembled in the square, Deichmann informed the villagers that he was conducting a search for resistance weapons caches. Deichmann then asked Mayor de Certeau to select 30 villagers to hold as hostages, who would then be traded for the captive Helmut Kampf. When de Certeau refused, telling Deichmann that he would have to choose himself, Deichmann ordered that the men be separated from the women and children and the latter be taken to the village church. The men were then divided into 6 groups and marched out to various sheds and barns scattered around the town. While most of the villagers cooperated with the Germans, a handful chose to flee as soon as they arrived. Among these was Marshal Broussard, who took a circuitous route out of the village to avoid being seen by the approaching troops. At one point, Broussard crossed paths with the mayor, who asked him where he was going. When Broussard explained that he was trying to run and hide, the mayor laughed and told him, "You can come and tell me tomorrow where your hideout is." It was the last time he would see the mayor alive. Others who refused to comply included Jacqueline Francine and André Pinade, the children of a Jewish couple who hid at their home while their parents went to the village square to be counted. There was also Paul Dutré, a 21-year-old who hid at home, and Roger Godfrin, an 8-year-old schoolboy who leaped from his school window. Godfrin was immediately spotted and shot by a soldier, but fell down as if dead and lay still even as the soldier approached his body and kicked him in the kidneys. Once the soldier had gone, Godfrin leapt up and fled into a nearby field. In total, around 20 villagers escaped in this manner, but the vast majority would not be so lucky. By 4 p.m., all of the men had been herded into the barns and sheds. One among them, German speaker Joseph Bergman, overheard the soldiers talking and whispered to his comrades they were about to be shot. But as they were surrounded by German machine guns, there was nothing they could do. Suddenly, at a prearranged signal, a pistol shot The shooting began. The SS troops aimed for the men's legs, cutting them down before moving in to shoot or bayonet them in the back. Once the Germans were satisfied everyone was dead, they laid straw, wood, and other fuel atop the bodies and set the sheds alight. Though badly wounded, 6 men were still alive and able to move. Robert Herbraz, Marcel Dartho, Yvon Roby, Clément Bressedier, Mathieu Barry, and Pierre-Henri Potron. Potron was the first to flee, but was immediately spotted and shot dead. The others, however, managed to escape and hid in a rabbit hutch until 7 that evening, when finally they were able to flee into the surrounding countryside. In all, 190 men died in the sheds and barns. Meanwhile, the women and children were led to the village church, the SS troops looting and desecrating the building before cramming their prisoners inside. 47-year-old Marguerite Reffanche, the only woman to survive, described what happened next. Around 4 p.m, a few soldiers brought into the nave, close to the choir, a large box from which hung strips which trailed to the ground. When the trailing strings were lit, the device suddenly exploded with a loud bang and gave off thick, black, suffocating smoke. Women and children, half choking and screaming in terror, rushed to those parts of the church where the air was still breathable. It was thus that the door to the sacristy was broken down under the irresistible pressure of a terrified crowd. I followed them and sat down on a step. My daughter joined me. The Germans saw that people had escaped into the room and cold-bloodedly shot down everyone who was hiding there. My daughter was killed where she stood by a shot fired from outside. I owe my life to closing my eyes and feigning death. Firing burst out into the church. Then the straw, firewood, and chairs were thrown in a heap onto the bodies lying on the flagstones. I had escaped the slaughter unwounded and took advantage of a cloud of smoke to hide behind the altar. In that part of the church, there were 3 windows. I went to the middle one, the biggest, and with the aid of the stool used to light the candles, tried to reach it. I don't know how, but my strength was multiplied. I heaved myself up to it as best I could and threw myself out of the opening that was offered to me by the already shattered window. I fell about 10 feet. When I looked up, I saw that I had been followed by a woman who was holding out her baby to me from the window. She fell down next to me, but the Germans, alerted by the child's cries, fired at us. The woman and the child were killed. I myself was wounded as I made my way to a nearby garden. I hid amongst some rows of peas and waited in terror for help to arrive. That was not until the following day, at about 5 p.m. In all, 248 women and 205 children perished in the burning church. Along with the men in the sheds, the total death toll was 642. That evening, the SS troops looted and partially razed the village before returning to their base, where Deichmann delivered his report to Division Commander Stadler. Stadler's reaction, however, was not what Deichmann expected. I'm extremely shocked by this report and shaken to the core. Deichmann, this may cost you dearly. I'm going to ask the division court at once for a court-martial investigation against you. I cannot allow the regiment to be charged with something like this. News of the massacre soon reached the Vichy government and the SS and army high commands, all of who agreed that Deichmann had grossly exceeded his orders and called for his immediate court-martial. Indeed, no less a figure than Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, volunteered to preside over the trial. But it was not to be. On June the 29th, Adolf Deichmann was killed by a shell splinter while fighting Allied forces near Neuers, and within a month, most of the SS men who had participated in the massacre were also dead. With no one left to try, the investigation was quietly dropped. The Oradour-sur-Glane massacre first came to the attention of the Allies, thanks to one Lieutenant Raymond Murphy, an American B-17 bomber navigator who had been shot down in April 1944 and was being sheltered by the resistance in the area. After witnessing the aftermath of the atrocity on August the 6th, Murphy was finally flown back to England, where on August the 15th he completed his final report, stating, "About 3 weeks ago, I saw a town within 4 hours bicycle ride up the Gerbeau farm of resistance leader Camille Gerbeau, where some 500 men, women and children had been murdered by the Germans. I saw one baby who had been crucified." The incident would not come to trial until January the 12th, 1953, when 65 of the surviving soldiers involved in the massacre were brought up on charges of war crimes in the French city of Bordeaux. However, the affair was to prove emblematic of the fractured nature of post-war France and Europe as a whole, failing to deliver any sort of satisfactory justice. For one thing, only 21 defendants were physically present at the trial, the rest having fled to communist East Germany or the British zone of occupation, where they could not be extradited. There was also the matter of 14 of the accused being from the region of Alsace-Lorraine. This region, which borders Germany and is home to many German-speaking residents, was annexed into the Third Reich following the armistice of 1940. The 14 Alsatian defendants claimed that they had been drafted into the SS against their will and should thus be exonerated of any crimes committed during the war. The final verdict, which found 20 men guilty, sentencing 2 to death and the rest to 10 years in prison or hard labor, caused an uproar across France, with left-wing politicians decrying the sentences as too lenient. Right-wing politicians said that but they were too harsh, and Alsace-Lorraine called for the acquittal of its citizens. The pressure was so intense that only a week later, on February the 19th, the French government passed an amnesty law and the 14 Alsatian defendants were released. This, in turn, sparked outrage in Germany, which argued that if French SS members could be exonerated on grounds of involuntary conscription, then so should German members. Consequently, the remaining defendants were eventually pardoned, and by 1958 all 21 were free men. General Heinz Lammerding, the commander of the Das Reich division who had ordered the policy of retaliation against the French resistance, never stood trial, dying in 1971 following a successful entrepreneurial career in Dusseldorf. In the end, only one man was ever convicted for participating in the massacre, former SS platoon leader Heinz Barth, who was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1983, but released in 1997. The ruins of Audun-sur-Glane still stand to this day, having been preserved on the orders of French President Charles de Gaulle as a memorial to the horrors of the German occupation. Everything has been left exactly as it was when the Germans marched out of the village, from sewing machines and other household items tossed out into the street during the looting to the burned-out remains of the church and Maire Desauteur's car. A museum housing personal items and testimony from villagers was dedicated in 1999, while the new village of Audun-sur-Glane, population 3,000, was built nearby shortly after the war. While Audun-sur-Glane was far from the largest massacre of civilians committed during the war, it nonetheless stands as a microcosm of the arbitrary brutality that characterized the deadliest conflict in human history. And of course, it is unique in being the only war crime so heinous that it shocked the Nazis themselves. So, I'm not going to ask whether you enjoyed that video, but I do hope you found it interesting. If you did, please do hit that like button below, and thank you for watching.